All right, good morning, everyone. Let's go ahead and get started. Um, I don't have any housekeeping or anything, any like announcements or anything. So I think we're gonna get started with this lesson here. But before I move on, does anybody have any sort of like announcements, any scheduling, or Tim, if you have anything, if you want to jump in as well. Um, okay, that sounds good. All right, so I'm going to jump into class today. And today we are going to be talking about passing data. So in this class, we are going to do, we're going to do a couple things. I've got my slides up, but I actually want to stop looking at these for 1 second so we can look at, oh, it did. Hold on 1 second. That stopped my screen share. What we're going to be doing today is we're going to be taking a look at a lot of this lesson plan in passing data. So this lesson plan is very much tutorial style. You might have worked through this lesson plan already, and if you have, that's totally fine. Yeah, that's totally fine. What we're going to do is I have some slides for y'all. We're going to do some conversation about like some of these concepts, and then I'm going to have you work through a single part of this tutorial. So like this first song show page. So the idea here is that at this point in the mod, and through the pre-work, we've done some things. We've shown you how to complete some stories. Like we've shown you how to create a new task or update a task or delete a task. We've done this a couple times, and now we're going to kind of like do that again, but we're going to dig a little bit deeper. We're going to like peel back some of the layers, open up the hood and take a look underneath the hood, whatever analogy you want to use. We're going to try and look at like what's going on under the hood when we create a form or when we create a button, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what we're going to be doing in class today. I mentioned this earlier. You might have already worked through this lesson plan, or in your project, you might have already implemented some of these things. So you might have already implemented your show page. You might have already implemented a form that you can create something with. So that's totally fine. But what you might find after this lesson is you might be exposed to some techniques that maybe you weren't using before that we do want you to be using in your project, or maybe something that you were using but you didn't necessarily understand how it worked. Yeah. So with that in mind, let's jump right into it. Cool. So passing data in Rails, it's all about data. So I've been up here a couple times last week and talking to you about data. Without data, this is what we said, but our apps would essentially be nothing. We can say that our data powers our web applications. We've talked about CRUDing data. So this is our create, read, update, and delete. We've also talked about database relationships, and not just creating a single record in the table, but creating a record with relationships to other records from other tables. But where does this data come from? So that's the big question of today's class. Like we've talked about like how to deal with data, how to store data, how to model data using our models, but how do we get input for that data? Our users are going to need to tell us about what they want to do. So in the workflow of a web application, a user is going to use it, and their actions manipulate something in the database. So this is a concept that I mentioned last week. But anytime you use a web application, you're almost always affecting something in the database. So for instance, a user creates an order on Amazon. A user wants to read a friend's post on Facebook. A user updates their profile on GitHub. A user deletes a tweet on Twitter. All of our CRUD actions, we're talking about things that changes that the users are affecting in the database. So our question is, how do we receive that user input? For example, if a user wants to create an order on Amazon, how do they tell us what items they want to buy? How do they tell us what their shipping address is? A user wants to read a post on Facebook. Cool. What post are you trying to read? Are you trying to read all posts? Probably not. There's probably a specific one you're looking at. Updating your profile on GitHub. What is your new information that we're supposed to be storing for you? Delete a tweet on Twitter. Which tweet do we want to delete? So with all of these things, when the user is using their web application, their input somehow is going to communicate what they're trying to do. So that's what we're trying to answer today. Params. So params is our first piece that we're going to take a look at in terms of user input. So in your controllers, in your Rails applications, you can call params. So you could just type in params. If you pry into the controller, you can type in params. And this is something that you have seen before in our mission work. And we didn't finish the testing class that we did together, but I checked in with all the groups and everyone was using some form of this params object. So what is this params object? Well, to be completely 100% technically accurate, params is a method you can call, and this will return to you the params object. So this params object looks and behaves just like a class. And if you look at its ancestry chain, you can see that it has a hash along its ancestry chain. Technically, it is not a hash, but for our purposes, you can think of it as a hash with superpowers. So all the normal hash things you can do, like accessing a hash with square brackets, adding a key to a hash, deleting a key from a hash, you can do all those same things with the params hash. So this is the important thing about our params hash. All of the user input that we get from our application, all the context that the user is trying to send to us, however you want to think of it, all their user input is going to appear in this params hash as key value pairs. So in our params hash, we'll have a key that represents what is the thing that the users this input represents. So it's like the name, just like in a hash, we're naming this piece of data, and the value is the actual value that they input. So for instance, if we're trying to create a new order on Amazon, in our params hash, we would probably see some key value pairs like the street address is whatever the street address in this hash is the key, and the value is whatever the user's address is, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. I want to pause here. Does anyone have any questions so far? Alex.
So this is slightly off topic, but would other frameworks, whatever they be in web development, Vue, React, whatever, do they all have this like kind of pseudo structure that carries all the data? Has this become like a normalized thing through most common frameworks, or is this something very endemic and specific to?
So this, first of all, you are pointing out that this is Rails specific. So params, this method, being able to call this, that is a Rails specific thing. Every web framework is going to have some notion, some way to access data as it comes in, but it's not all going to be done in the same format. And something that I think is unique about this params hash, and something we'll see throughout this class this morning, is that Rails takes all of your user input and puts it into this params hash. There are many places where user input can come from, and that's going to be like the purpose of today's class. Let's talk about all the different ways we can get that user input. But the params hash doesn't distinguish between those different types. It just takes any different type of user input and puts it into your params hash. So I would say that's one way that the params hash is maybe, it's not necessarily unique. I'm not as familiar with other web frameworks, or it's been a while to where I don't know exactly how other web frameworks are going to handle this. But yeah, there are some features that are going to be specific to Rails. Cool, thank you, Alex. Anything else? Any other questions? Sam.
When you mentioned that the controller, in your controller, you can call params. That's the only place you can access that unless you make like an instance variable of params that, like, let's say the ERB could access, like, will you be able to pry an ERB and call params? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think technically you are correct that your controller is not the only place that you can call params. I believe, yes, you can also call them in the view. You could call the params method in an ERB. Just like you said, if you want to call some Ruby in your view, usually you could just call it within ERB tags. So you could try to call params in there, and I believe that would work. Now, you can tell that I'm not 100% sure, and the reason is because we almost never do this. We don't actually want to access params in the view. And the reason goes back to Tim's class on MVC and sort of our like logic responsibilities. It would be inappropriate for the view to deal with the user input because that is more of like an application level logic, business logic kind of code. The view should only be concerned with presentation logic. So if you are dealing with the params in your view, you're probably overstepping your logic boundaries of just dealing with the presentation logic. So typically you only want to call the params in your controller, I think is the first part of your question. And then the second thing that you're correctly identifying is that because this is a Ruby object, you can pass this around like another Ruby object in your Ruby program. So you could pass this to the view through an instance variable. If you had a class that I might refer to as a Poro, a plain old Ruby object that isn't a model of view or controller, you just make your own class like you did in mod 1, you could pass the params to that as well. So there are a lot of different places where params could pop up, but the controller is the place where you mostly want to be dealing with it to adhere to your MVC principles. Mike.
So you just mentioned that params can pop up in other places, but we're more focused on where it's using the controller. But is its functionality like solely just to pass information, or is there other functionality as well?
It is to pass information, and part of that passing information is a little bit of security as well that we'll see in this tutorial. And you might have done it before, it's called strong params, and we'll talk about that more when we get there. So it does add in a little bit of security for us, but mostly, just like you said, yes, it is just passing that data.
Cool, thank you.
You're welcome. All right, I've got a couple more slides here, and I'm gonna let you all get your hands dirty a little bit. Okay, so user input into URLs. This is gonna be the first thing that we talk about. So if we have in our routes, so I'm gonna talk about the routes file a little bit. We talked about this last week, so this might be a little bit of review. So if in my routes file, I have something like this, and keep in mind, so this is a contrived example. I am making a route here that's purposely like kind of complex that you would never make. It's not a RESTful route, but just as a demonstration purpose, if we have a route that's get to /show/me/the/songs, and in this example, I've got it routing to a songs controller and a show'em action inside that songs controller. Okay, so I've got my example route here. Your Rails router is a pattern matcher. Its job is to take an incoming HTTP request, match its verb and path to one of our routes, which are written as verb path combos. So you'll recall from Tim's first class last week, every HTTP request is going to include a verb and a path. So a verb is one of our get, post, put, patch, delete. And there are other verbs too, as we talked about on day 1, but those are main ones we're going to worry about. The verb and then the path, which is the after the domain name and the URL. So it could be localhost 3000 /, so everything after the slash is your path. Everything after the first slash is your path. So the Rails router is going to look at the verb and path of the incoming request, match it to one of our routes, and the first one that it matches, it's then going to execute that controller action. So as soon as Rails matches this get to show me the songs, whatever we have listed for 2 for a controller action, it would then execute that. So that's how our Rails router works. If no route matches, it's going to throw an error. So that's your routing error, no route matches error that we've seen before. Your paths, you can separate these into segments. Each segment is separated by a slash, and a route will only match a request if all the segments match. Okay, so what am I talking about here? If we look at our example route here of get to show me the songs, we can look at that as a route with 4, or a path with 4 segments. Yeah, so that's my next bullet here. So our example route here has 4 segments. Show me the songs. So each slash creates a new segment in our route. And order does matter when we're trying to match these segments. So only a get request to /show /me /the /songs would ever match this route. So a get request to show me some songs would not match. A get request to show me songs would not match, so you can't leave out one of the segments. A get to show me the songs please would not match, so you can't add in an additional segment. A get to show the me songs, you can't reverse the order, so order matters in the segments. And a post request to show me the songs would not match, so the verb has to match as well. I think that was a little bit of review from our router, from what we know about the router from last week. Does anyone have any questions about this, what I've covered so far? How our router works? Max.
Yeah, just a quick question on that. I noticed when we were doing IDs for the project that we could put in an ID that was not a number, and it would try and like route to there. So we could have a word as an ID.
Okay.
Why is that? And is that just because the symbol ID is not unique as, or doesn't refer to like the incremental number that the database does?
So what you're talking about, Max, is a dynamic segment, and that's where we have a colon in our route here. That's what I'm going to talk about next. So if you still have that question, let me know after I cover that. But I want to make sure that we're all good on this part where we don't have the colon in the route, where we're just matching the verbs and paths. Mike.
I think I may be answering my own question by asking the question, but I was just going to ask, like, is that why the order matters in your routes file? Because it's going to match to the first one. So when we get to more like complex things with CRUD, we've found that, I mean, my partner have found that it's going to hit a different action that we're not after, and we had to change the order. Like, I get it at a high level, and it might just me just kind of missing the points together, but that's pretty much it, right?
Yeah, I think you're on the right track. The one thing I do want to point out is that when I say order matters here, I'm talking about the order of the segments. So like show me the song. So in that sense, order matters. And then what you're pointing out, Mike, is that also the order in which you define your routes in the routes file matters because of where is it? Where I say the first one that it matches. Yeah, the first one that it matches. Yeah, so you are going to run into this in your project at some point, where if you define your routes, I think if you build out the project in the order that we specify, so like build the index page, then build the show page, then if you build it out in that order, then you are going to run into some issues because of this, the first one it matches rule of the router.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions before we get to dynamic segments? Okay, so we're still talking about user input into URLs. How do we get some data out of these URLs? Your routes can include dynamic segments. So the segments are the things separated by slashes. We can make some of those segments dynamic. And this is what that would look like. So this is the same exact route we had before, except now for the me, we have a colon in front of it. So we have show colon me the songs. So what does that do for our routes? Well, as soon as we put the colon in front of one of our segments, it's now a dynamic segment. It looks like a symbol, and it might be referred to as a symbol. In fact, Max, when you asked your question, I think you referred to it as a symbol. I do want you to know that technically this is not a symbol like it is in Ruby. So like a Ruby symbol is a different thing. Even though we might call this a symbol, it's not a symbol, and it would technically be incorrect to call it a symbol. The technical term is dynamic segment, but people don't really use that term very often. So if someone calls it a symbol, that is just the way that we tend to talk about these things. Okay, so dynamic segments, what do? They match any value for that segment. You can kind of think of it as like a wild card if you're playing like a card game, like anything would match this, or this is like the Joker. So like the me in here is the Joker. Anything could match this. This will accept any value. Yeah. So what are the implications? Well, if we have a GET request to show Brian the songs, that would match because we can now match anything for our me segment. A GET request to show 1, 2, 9, 4, 8, 2 the songs would match. And the point of including this is to say that when I say that any value can match here, I mean like it truly means like any sequence of characters. So it's not, the router is not sophisticated. I think a lot of times, and Max, your question might have indicated this a little bit, like a lot of times our first instinct is that because if we call the dynamic segment, if we call it ID, it will give our segment some special powers, but it's truly just like any characters will match. So I could put Brian in here. I could put 1, 2, 9, 4, 8, 2. I could put gibberish. It really, truly doesn't matter. It's not gonna treat it as a symbol or a string or an integer or a float or an ID or any of this. It's just a sequence of characters. Here's another example. So a GET request to show me the songs would match. So in this is something that, Mike, your question about like, we ran into something where our routes were out of order and we had to change the order to get it to work. This can cause you some confusion. If I put in me as my dynamic segment, the dynamic segment of me is now taking on the value of me. So we're using whatever name here and the value are the same. So this can be confusing, but this would still match this route. A GET request to show the me songs would not match. So we still need our dynamic segments to match in order. So in this case, the third segment has to be the, with the way we've defined the route. But if we look at it in here, the third segment is me. So that doesn't work. And that is dynamic segments. So what I'm going to have you do, is this just the same? Okay, I have some more slides here. I'm going to keep going. Forgot about this. So for dynamic segments, I mentioned you can think of it as like a wildcard or a joker. Another way to think of it is like a variable. So it's kind of like saying we could accept any value for this and we're going to store it in this variable. The way that we hold on to that value, the way that we get access to that value, again, is through our params hash. So in our params hash, the key is the name of the segment, and the value is what is in the route in place of that segment. And sometimes we refer to it as a placeholder for that reason. We could say that the segment is taking the place of the actual value that's going to be input in there. So in our example of a GET request to show Brian the songs, when we're matching our route with the dynamic me segment, in params, what we're going to get is a key where we're going to get a key value pair where the key is the name of the dynamic segment, which is me, and the value is whatever the actual value was in the request. So if the actual request was show Brian the songs, this key of me would point to Brian. If we then sent a request of show Tim the songs, then we would have the key of me and a value of Tim. Oops. Okay, up next, I'm going to have you do some practice and work through the tutorial and the lesson. I am going to have you do it in driver navigator fashion, but I want to check if there's any questions before I move on to that. Questions about getting input from our users through URLs, dynamic segments, Any of that? Params hash? Yeah, V.
Do you mind repeating why the example in which me was the third element segment would not work?
Yeah, I think that's in this previous slide. Okay, so this is going back to our rules from the previous slide. So any segment that is not dynamic still has to match exactly. So if we look at this third one here, we're matching the dynamic segment. So here we said the second segment has to be me. So this second segment, these first two match. The first one has to be show. The second one can be anything because it's dynamic. The point where it doesn't match is when we get to the third segment. This me here has to match exactly with the, because this is not a dynamic segment. This is just a regular segment. So because this one is not the, this third one is not the, that's why it doesn't match.
That makes sense. Thank you.
You're welcome. Adam?
Yeah, and on that same example, the fourth bullet, you could make it work if you put a restriction on the dynamic segment, right? Like if you said the me has to be a number 1 through 10, otherwise go to a different path. It would work in that case. Is that right?
Not quite. We don't have the concept of restricting dynamic segments and saying what type of input. We only have the ability to say this can take on any value. So in these first two examples, show Brian the songs and show 1, 2, 9, 4, just this number. There's no way for us to say this has to be a number, or this has to be an ID, or this has to be a string. We don't get any sort of constraints with it. So that's not why this doesn't match. The reason why this doesn't match just comes down to this third segment of the not matching here.
Got it. I might expand on this offline with you because I think I did that in my project, but I'll save it for later.
Sure, that works. Any other thoughts on this? I am going to have us do an activity here, but I am going to debrief it when we come back together. So if there's any questions that pop up while you're doing it, you will get a chance to ask those. But for now, let's go ahead and take a palm, and we'll come back at 9:34, and we'll kick off this next activity. All right, it is 34. Give everybody a couple more seconds to hop back on. Cool. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to put us into some breakout rooms, and I am going to pair you all off. So just randomly generated pairs. I want you all to work through this song show page in the lesson plan, and I want you all to work through this in a driver navigator style. So I do want to take some time today to think about pairing a little bit and make this kind of like a secondary learning goal for us. So especially if you've worked through this lesson plan before, thinking about like driver navigator and how to do that well and what the advantages are of that, I think is like another thing you can focus on for this time. So for driver navigators, I just wanted to give you all a couple quick tips that I think students benefit from hearing. So for drivers, your job as the driver, actually, well, before I go too far, can I get like a thumbs up if have you heard driver navigator before, or in mod 1, did you all do some driver navigator? See some thumbs, cool, okay. Yeah, so it seems like we're familiar with this concept. So if you are driving, so you're the person with your hands on the code, your job is to listen. So I think a lot of times a mistake that I see students making when they do driver navigator is they treat it like the driver is kind of like the person who is coding, and the navigator is almost like a support person. So they're there to help if needed. But I think the what I want you all to push you all towards doing is for the driver to be more truly try to listen to what your navigator is saying. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't have your own ideas or you can't input into the process. But if you have an idea of something that you need to do, discuss it with your partner rather than going off and doing it. So what I don't want to see is like a driver, if you have an idea, go off and like just type it out yourself, code it yourself. What you should do instead is to discuss with your partner and then have them drive you through that implementation. And then the navigator, your job is to direct. The tip that I have for my navigators is to try to use technical vocabulary rather than telling your partner exactly what to type. So for example, prefer to say something like add another argument rather than type a comma. So if I'm like making a method, we make one argument, okay, this method's gonna need a second argument. So then your driver can interpret that as, well, they said I need a separate argument, so I'm gonna type a comma. So where the driver, their job is to kind of like interpret what you're saying and also interpret what characters they need to type. So those are my two tips that I have if you're doing if you're a driver or if you're a navigator. What I would like to do is I would like to do one round of this, and then we're going to do a second round. So the next round we'll talk about forms, and we can switch driver navigators. Then we will do 2 more sections where I'll give you new partners to do this again. Does anyone have any questions, or does anybody have any additional thoughts on to be honest, it's been a while since I've done true driver navigator. Does anyone have any like thoughts or tips they'd like to share with the group before I let y'all go? Or any questions about what I'm asking you to do? Let me also just drop this link in your channel. Sydney.
So is this still going off the set list that we've been building all along? And do we have to have a certain part of that? And if so, do we have to have a certain part of that done to do this activity?
Yes. The part that you need to have done is essentially, I think it's the same part that we started off of the feature testing lesson.
Okay.
So let's take a look at that set list. There it is. Yeah, so we have all everything up to our last class was model testing, I believe. So I think this model testing branch should have the most up-to-date code. Yeah, so you can go off of this version. I would say it's probably the safest version. Or you can, if you need to check out a branch, you can check out this model testing branch to build off of it, or you can use your own local copy if you were following along in class. But yeah, I think the only code that you need to have is the active record associations class where we had the has many belongs to built out. Good question. Any other questions? All right, I will let you all go. We're doing driver navigator through the song show page. I'm gonna give you all 20, I'll put you in your breakout rooms for 25 minutes. So what I will ask you to do is at the end of those 25 minutes, go ahead and you can, I'll leave it up to you all. If you all finish early, you can take a POM, but if you don't get a chance to take a POM, we'll take one together as well. Oh, sorry, I hit the wrong button. I clicked open. That's not what I meant to do.
Hey, Catherine.
For some reason, Brian, it kicked me back to the main.
Yes, let me assign you back. Okay, you should have room now.
template. So we'd have to do a view. Yeah. So then you would do, and I would make it show.html because it'll match your controller method.
Yep. I was just going real literal. I made a view.
A bundle install, I would guess, maybe they didn't carry over. Yeah.
Keep it in here.
Oh, it doesn't look like it. Yeah, I would add capybara. Oh, there we go.
And we'll say as a visitor. Then next line will another describe statement with
hash show. Great. So I think then that's all we needed here. So let's head over to our songs controller, or I guess we can test it again. That works.
Life.title.
Right. Cool. Looks good.
Okay.
Let's see if it changes the errors that we get or if it does.
Oh,
Awesome. Yay.
there we go.
Okay. So then we can go down a lot here. We have that. All right. So now it wants us to do the
Hit.
Any other thoughts, Megan, or you just want to take a palm?
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I was looking at the snippet stuff.
Has many, so then you can call artist and then call the name. It might work. Yeah, it probably will work, but it's weird to me though. Seems like conceptually a little weird, I guess.
Manager or like a different, I don't know, user group.
Exactly. Yeah. Great. So then next we're going to say back, if we reference back down here to the commented out part. So as a visitor, when I visit the artist index, then my current path is artist new. So you could just say like,
oops. You want to put the name of the song first?
There you go. The percent equals.
Song.
At song. Oh, it would be at song, right? Because
Yep,
we did the.
you're right.
Yeah. Cool.
Cool.
And then, do you know the shortcut to copy a line down?
I do. Wait, you have to be on it. There.
Yeah, there you go. So then we can do what is the next attribute?
Just like bling it out and put like
Bling it out.
put song and then like artist, or we could keep going. Up to you.
I always get stuck on blinging it out. Let's keep on.
test for it to hit your pry there.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, I'm having trouble like figuring out where the pry is gonna hit. Like if I guess if I put it in the view, it would hit.
Yes,
Yeah.
it could hit. Yeah, you'd have to put it in lobster claws in the view.
So this one should hit here theoretically. Sweet. Okay. So what is break?
I think here though, it's your pry is just seeing what's inside your test.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe. Okay, so we're getting the ID. Interesting. All right, go back to our HTML dot our show.html. I feel like okay.
Alex, did you and did you and Megan finish up that portion of the lesson?
Yeah, we did. And then my speakers died and my audio freaked out. That's why I had to drop the call and rejoin.
Gotcha. Cool. All right. Well, we've got about 2 minutes left on this timer.
Hey, is it just us or
I don't know.
Yeah.
did I get put into, are we in new rooms or?
We're all back together right
Yeah.
now.
Oh, I'm sorry. All I can see is one person. I'm sorry.
Okay, so let's as I was jumping around breakout rooms, I saw that people were in different spots. So I want to do a little bit of polling. Can I get everybody to open up the participants panel? And can I get a green check mark if you were able to complete through the song show page? So where we add in our song and our artist name into the view and get our test passing. Can I get a green check mark? Okay, so it looks like most people were able to get through that. I saw some people went into the new artist form part as well, and that's totally fine. What I'm going to do next is I want to do a little debrief from that, so to see if anybody has any questions, or maybe if anybody ran into any errors that we could take a look at as a class. I think these tutorials are nice for seeing like what's the ideal version of doing something, but not very good for us like debugging and looking at errors together, which I think is good. So we will do that after we get back from a POM. So let's take another POM. We'll come back at 10:00, we'll call it 10:09. All right, it's 10:09. Give everybody 30 seconds to log back on. All right. So I'd love to hear from some of you all. Did any questions come up as you were working through that tutorial, or possibly any like errors that you ran into that you weren't sure how to deal with, that we could take a look at together? Sandra.
Yeah, I think we ran into like doing like the song name dot title in the test didn't pass it, but if we put the string in the like have content piece of the test, then it would run. And just kidding, it now is working. So I don't know why. I don't know why it wasn't working.
Would you mind sharing so that we could take a look at it as well?
Yes. Let's see which screen this shares. Hopefully that one. Are you seeing my text editor?
Yes, I see it now.
Cool. Yeah, I'm not sure which, what was breaking it, but yeah, it's working.
And it's that line 18 in your test where you say beret.artist.name.
That one worked fine. It was this beret.title wasn't working, so we switched it to putting the string in there, and it worked. So yeah, I don't know if James, if you have any insight of why that's working now, or what we changed in between those things.
No, I'm not sure either. But when we went to the Rails literal page, it was displaying the title correctly. So when we did beret.title, it should have found Raspberry Beret and it errored out.
Yeah, it depends on what the error was. And the one thing to keep in mind is that it looks like you were having issues with the test. So you're getting some sort of error in the test. So it makes sense that if you ran, when you said you were still able to go to the page, I assume what you mean is you were able to run the server Rails S and go to the page. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so do keep in mind that that is going to be different than our test. Yeah. Okay, well, I think let's go ahead and move on. If we're not getting any errors right now, that test all looked fine to me. And in fact, I do want you to use that version where you're calling, variable name dot title rather than the hard coded string. Let's go to Sam.
This might actually be an environmental issue, but this is the second time it's happened. The first time was at my project, but my test database is saving information into its test tables. This time it's only one table, not both of them. In my project, it was both of them. If I delete it from Postico, it will go away and it won't save again. But I'm not sure why that's happening.
Are you getting this in the set list working through the tutorial?
Yeah, I am.
Gotcha. Okay, well, let's go ahead and take a look. Can you share your screen?
Yeah, I can do that.
I think the first question I want to ask you, Sam, is how do you know that your test database is getting corrupted or yeah?
Well, the first time, just based on the first time, I didn't check this time, but if I check Postico, number one, my test database table here is saving information when it shouldn't. And I'm not populating this from anywhere. Oh no, it is populating from a test from previously. It is from spec feature song. Should be song spec also. Oh, I guess not. Yeah, I don't know how it's saving the information, but it's there. If I run a test and if I were to check for, let's say, all the songs through the test, it would give me these no matter what test I run. Not like we did that in this example, but when I was just checking out my test database, I see it's happening again. And like I said, if I were to take this out here and delete it or do it through Rails console, it should delete and not come back again. But I'm just worried that something underlying is happening.
Yeah, so a couple things right off the bat. It is, you want to make sure that you're looking, I see, I'm going to highlight it on your screen, but I see right there that you're looking at setlist test. Can you go back to localhost first, and just so we can see that you are going to have your two different databases. So we have our development and our test. So good that you're looking at your test. And yeah, when you open up that test database, the issue, just so we're all clear, is that when we open up these tables, we should not see any data stored in these tables. Our test database should be clean with each run, and our data should be created within the test, it shouldn't be there before we run the test. So we don't have any songs, but we do have artists, right? Yeah. So let's go ahead and just run the test suite.
Yeah, just RSpec.
Yeah, and let's see what that does first.
I guess I never resolved this, but I think it's just a warning. Oh, here, actually specification reset. I'm not sure if that has anything to do with it, actually.
I think you're okay, and you're correct. It's a warning. You see how it starts with warn colon.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that should be okay. It shouldn't cause any issues. Let's run the whole test suite. So let's just run RSpec and see what happens.
Sure. And if it's something else that can't be figured out now, I don't mind just looking it up later, trying to figure it out, because I think it's like touching off topic, but I was just more worried that something under the hood.
Let's run RSpec again, and yeah, if we'll do a couple debugging things here, and if it's something that might be more of an environment issue, then we can take a look at that. Okay, so it doesn't look like any of our tests are failing. So let's go ahead and do let's delete those two artists out of our database. So yeah, let's just manually do it through post-to-co.
And then run it again.
And let's run it again, and let's see if we get those artists again. Let's refresh.
Yeah, it's gone. Like what's happened to me previously, where it doesn't come back to saving.
Yeah, so that all looks good there. I will say, so that's what I think that's valuable for us to do together, and for us to keep in mind that like we can keep using post-to-co to view our database and view the state of our database. One thing you want to just a couple like common things that could cause this. Can you go back to your Atom?
Yeah.
Or your VS Code. So one thing that can happen is if you use, if any of your creation lines, like these lines here that create this data, actually it looks like line 14 is not part of it, but the other lines, if any of those lines are outside of an if block, that can cause this issue. So if you just forget to put your if block and you just have these in describe blocks, that can be an issue. And then the other thing is before all. So I mentioned in class last week that there is before each, which is kind of like your setup method from Minitest. There is another one called before all, and I would stay away from that because it doesn't do the automatic teardown that we've talked about in class. So try to stay away from before all. If you are using before all, do this thing where you look at using post-to-co and see if it does create some like test data in your test database, because we don't want to do that.
Okay.
And yeah, same. We can take it looks like, my guess is that you might have had these lines outside of your describe block at some point, and it was causing you issues. But now that we're able to run our tests and not see our test database corrupted, I think we're good.
Okay, cool.
Let's go to Joe.
Is there a manual teardown if you have been using before all?
Yeah, I think you would then have to just do after all. So I think you do a before all to set it up, and then in your after all, do a manual teardown of the objects you create. That's how you do it.
Also, a kind of slightly off-topic question. With the setup, how do you use the string interpolation? For some reason, since you have to use the instance variable for the exchange of, or if you do the setup, my brackets included the ID, but it doesn't pick it up for some reason.
Can you share your screen and let's take a look together?
Sure. What I have now is it's kind of adjusted because I put this here. Like normally before I would have this and that being taken out.
Oh, I see. I think I see what what the issue might be. So these describe blocks, we've talked about them as descriptors, and you can also think of them as like they're grouping tests together. So so we see that we have this before each block in here, which is setting up our instance variables. So this code looks correct, Joe, where we are trying to interpolate at Gladwell.id in here.
Yeah.
The issue is with our describe blocks. See how this describe block is at the same level as this describe block? So essentially what this before each does is because this before each block is inside of this block, this before each only applies to all of the tests within this before each block.
Okay.
Now, if you hover your cursor like right here around line 4, you should see a little arrow that you can collapse like that. Yeah, and that will help you visualize it a little bit easier, that that describe block is separate than this describe block. So what you would have to do is you would have to take this it block that you're trying to use and just move it inside that describe block.
I see. Okay, got it. Would taking this before this describe, would that work as well?
That would also work. Yep. Because then, yeah, you move that out to this outer RSpec describe block, and then that would apply to all the tests in here.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So yeah, the moral of the story is that these describe blocks are useful for grouping your tests together, and then it makes sharing this setup between the code a lot easier too. So what you're doing, Joe, here is like once your tests get big, this is a good way to make them more concise, more organized.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other thoughts from the first part of this tutorial? If not, I'm going to jump back into my slides here. Yeah. Sam, heads up, I'm going to put you on mute. Okay, so we've talked about user input into the URLs. That is our first way to get data. Just receiving that ID is something that we're going to do very frequently. Now that you've done this before, I don't need to yeah, I just want to emphasize the common mistake that I see students make is to assume that when your dynamic segment is called ID, that does something special for your routes, that it makes your route only accept the ID of a song. Your routes are not that smart. Your routes only do what we've covered today, which is they're a pattern matcher. And if one of the segments has that colon in it, it's dynamic, so it can match any value for it. That's really as smart as your routes get. They don't really do anything else for you. Max?
Yeah, is there a way to have it be smarter, or would you do that within the method in your controller that you point to have it differentiate then if it's like a string or number?
Yeah, not that I know of. There's nothing that I know of will make your routes smarter. What I would suggest is exactly what you're saying. If you need to do some sort of like validation around user input, it happens after the router. So after your router has routed you to a controller action, then you can do some manipulation. And that is appropriate because that's very much like application level logic. Check to make sure that the user gave me valid input. That is more application level. And we will see that we will push some of that off to the model as well. But the point stands that both the model and the controller, those happen after the router has already routed the request. Okay, let's talk about forms a little bit. So in this next section, we are going to use something called form tag. And again, you might have seen this before. You might have worked through this tutorial already. You may or may not have seen this, but form tag is the one of our action view helpers. Just for conciseness, we usually just refer to these as view helpers. View helpers, they're going to they are going to help us generate HTML. So in the pre-work, in the intermission work, we had you do a static challenge where you built out a web page. We had you build out a web page in just raw HTML, but typically in Rails, we are going to rely on view helpers to build a lot of HTML for us. So I'll say that again, in Rails, we try to rely on view helpers to write HTML for us. We don't actually want to write the HTML by hand. So you might ask me, like, Brian, if we don't actually want to write the HTML, why did we do that pre-work where we wrote out the HTML? It's because the HTML is still being generated. So we at least need to be able to read and understand the HTML that's generated, and also know what HTML we want to have generated for debugging purposes. So we could say, oh, I expected this to be a form with this input. It looks like it did generate it properly. Let me double check my view helper. So good to use view helpers to build HTML, still important to be able to read HTML and look at HTML and know what HTML is doing. The other thing that this view helper is going to do for us, this form tag specifically, is going to handle some built-in security that we don't need to concern ourselves with. So the lesson plan in this tutorial is going to have you look at your task manager form. I do want you to do that. I want you to go through that part of the lesson plan and look at that form and compare and contrast how they are similar or different. And that's something that I would expect us, I want us to do together when we come back together after this. So be on the lookout for this in the tutorial. Okay, so form tag is our view helper that's going to create our HTML form for us, but we also need to use some other view helpers to create the inputs into our form. So the form is like the high level thing that's accepting input, but then we need inputs in our form to say how many inputs we're accepting, what type of input we're accepting, and also how we're going to treat that data. So some examples of things we can input into a form: we can have text fields, we can have number fields, we can have password fields, checkboxes, radio buttons. These last three here are things that are maybe a little bit more advanced that we're not going to get into too much this mod. The main thing we're going to concern ourselves with this mod is going to be text fields and number fields. Each of these inputs has a name attribute. In your HTML that's generated, it has a name attribute. This name attribute is the key in the params hash. So earlier we talked about how the params hash is going to accept all of our user input. Now all of our user input from our forms, that's also going to appear in our params hash. So now we've stumbled upon two different types of user input that will all congregate in the same place. Both the dynamic segments that we're getting from the routes and any inputs we get from the forms, it all comes together in this params hash. Params hash is kind of like the gathering place for all of our user input. The value of in our params hash is whatever we input into the field, the user inputs into the field. So if it's a text box, it's whatever they type in. If it's a number, it's whatever number they put in. When the user submits the form, so every form is going to have some like submit button. When the user submits that form, what happens underneath the hood is that a new HTTP request is sent. So Tim on day one talked a little bit about HTTP, and that's the language that web applications speak. Under the hood, everything that a user does creates an HTTP request. So this is digging into a little bit more about the technical specs of what happens underneath the hood when we click buttons and forms and all that. So a new HTTP request is sent. The verb and the path are specified in the form element, the HTML element that's generated. And the body of the request is going to include all of our form data. So this is something that I don't think we covered too in depth, but every HTTP request can include a body, which is supplemental data for the request. So this is where your user input, your form fields appear. And I think that is it for this section. Does anybody have any questions on forms? I'm sure there will be more. This will be a little bit more complicated than the last section. All right, if there are no questions, let's go ahead and stop here for another break. We'll come back at 10:35. All right, so let's go ahead and start back up. Yeah, I was just looking, Adam, I was just looking at your question. I see you posted a little bit more context under my slides that I linked in the cohort channel. And yeah. This Adam's comment in here. Adam, do you have this code that you posted in your question? Do you think you could share that code with us? Do you have that up right now?
Sure. I altered it to songs. I was doing it more for my project, but I'm happy to share that if that's okay.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I thought we would be in the project anyway, so that works.
Okay. One moment. So the code is here. Basically, I wanted to restrict the ID that you could input to a number. And so that I can still go to other pages. Like if I made new, if I made bone, or like whatever I wanted to make as like another page, it wouldn't automatically think it's an ID and go to this too. And I realized after thinking it through that I could do this perhaps in the model or in the controller. And I'm just wondering what's best practice there.
Gotcha. Yeah, so the issue that you're running into, and that I think every Rails developer runs into this at some point. So if you send this request of /sections/new, so if you send a request just like that, where you send get to /section/new, that route would actually match this one for the ID, and it would see new as the value that is taking the place of that ID dynamic segment there. So what you've done is you've added in this constraint section to say, if you get this ID, if you get new, if you get a get request to /section/new, that should not match our ID. So one thing that you could do, so this will work. One thing that you could do, which I think is the more common fix to get around this, is to move this route up above the ID route, because you're taking advantage of the pattern matching and the fact that the router will match the first route that it sees that matches.
Got it. That's incredibly helpful. I totally forgot that it goes line by line. So thank you.
Yeah. The other thing that I want to talk about is this constraint section a little bit, just because I've never seen this before and I didn't know that you can do this. But the comment that I want to make about this is that the constraint that you're adding here is still pattern matching. This right here is what we would call a regular expression. And what a regular expression does is it essentially creates a pattern. So you're saying, as you described earlier, this pattern is saying only accept an integer here. Do not accept only accept a number, don't accept like the word new. So while we are adding some constraints here, these constraints are still around the pattern, the text in here. You can't put any constraint in here that says like, this has to be the ID of a section in my database.
Got it. That's helpful clarification. So that's what you were saying. I can't actually constrain it in that way.
Right. Yeah. You can constrain it based on the pattern like this. You can't constrain it if you wanted to put additional constraints like check and make sure this is in the database. That would have to happen outside of the router.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. I'm going to stop your. Oh, you stopped your sharing. Perfect. Cool. Let's go ahead and jump into the practice section. So the next thing that I want you all to work through is the new artist form section in the lesson plan. And I want you all to switch off driver navigator. Now, I mentioned earlier, some of you all did, I think, move into this section of the lesson, which is totally fine. If you have additional time, I'm going to do a 20-minute timer again. If you have more time, work through the edit artist form section of the lesson. So that is not going to be the subsequent section. If I take a look at this lesson plan, it goes new artist, which I think is this one, new artist form, and this is a bit of a longer section. and then it goes into destroying an artist. If you have time, skip destroying an artist and go into edit artist form. And this one, it pushes you a little bit more to try and do it on your own. So I think this is a better thing to do if you wanna, if you have a little extra time. Where am I? And I think that is about it. I mentioned earlier that I was planning on switching up the driver navigator pairs, but I think because people are in different parts of the lesson, we'll just stay in the same partner so we don't have to like figure any issues out if people are in different spots. All right, so 20 minutes work on the new artist form section. And Grayson, I saw you had a hand up earlier. Did I answer your question?
It was something not entirely related to the lesson. I was just going to ask if having those dynamic segments, would that open you up to SQL injection?
Potentially, yes. Yeah. So with this accepting user input, anytime we accept user input, it opens us up to SQL injection. So really briefly, what is SQL injection? SQL injection is where a user inputs some SQL into your SQL queries without you knowing it. So for example, if you accept some user input and you say for your ID, you put in something like this. So let's say like we're visiting localhost 3000 /songs / and then if I know that whatever I put here is going to be input into a SQL query, if I do something malicious, like I try to like input some SQL, like let me put like a string drop table users, something like that. This is what SQL injection looks like, where someone tries to like input some SQL into your application without you knowing it. So the short answer, Grayson, is anytime we're accepting user input, that could potentially open us up to SQL injection if we are passing that data into a SQL query. One thing to keep in mind that I went over on last Tuesday when we went over intro to ORMs, Active Record has some built-in security to prevent against this. So even though it does open us up to it, you don't really have to worry about it. Rails will mostly handle that for you.
Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. All right, I'm going to open these breakout rooms. Feel free to use the ask for help button if you need me for anything. right, welcome back, everybody. So this section is a little bit longer than the last one. So I'm going to do some polling again. Could everybody open up the participants panel, and could I get a green check mark? Yes, if you were able to work through the end of this section and up to destroying an artist. Let me screen share just to show. So working through the entire lesson plan through the end here where we create our artist. Okay, so it looks like most people weren't able to get there. Can we do the same thing? I'm gonna clear everybody's answer. If you were able to get through, get up to this point, let me be a little bit more specific. To get up to this point where you add in the form into the view, I guess actually it would be this point right here, where you add the form into the view, and you are supposed to compare this form with what you made in your task manager, which looks like this. Can I get a green check mark if you're at that point? Okay. Cool. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you all another, let's say 10 minutes to work through this, and then we'll debrief this section. Cool. So I'm going to open up your breakout rooms again. Change this to 10 minutes. And if you have any questions or if you're getting stuck on anything, because I know this part of the lesson does have a couple more places where it says use TDD to figure this out. If you are getting stuck on anything, just use the ask for help button and I can give you a hand. V, do you have a question?
Yeah, I was trying to use the ask for help button, but I don't think it worked.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm not sure. Sometimes it like sends me a notice and sometimes it doesn't. I'll jump into your room first then.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I'm gonna open these up. And then Aiden, were you with Robert?
Yeah, I was. I got kicked out when I left the breakout room.
Cool. I just assigned you. You should see an invitation.
Okay, thanks.
And I'm taken to an artist form.
Hey, Brian.
Hello.
So two things that are happening. For I had already done the delete test, and for that test, let me get there. It's not fine. It's going to a different page instead of the page that I'm telling you to go. So let me open the test for you. So this is the test. When I put save and open page here, oh, it has to be before this. Yeah, it's taking me to the artist index page. So then I go to the view. Oops. It's taking it here instead of the show page, which is where I have my button.
Gotcha. So looking at this, I don't think this is that page because I see over here, this button is delete. And over here, this one is new artist. So I don't think this is the view that we're on right now.
Let me run it again because I think I had two pages open. That might be the wrong page. Yeah, it's taking me to the artist index page.
Gotcha. Okay. So can you open up that that test that you just ran? User can delete an artist. And we have a save and open page, right? Oh, I see. Yeah, okay. Okay, so yeah, I think you're right about this. Can you run it one more time just for a sanity check? The user can delete artist spec. Yeah, okay. Can we open up the routes file? Artist slash. So let's put a couple pries around here to see where we're going. Let's do a pry. So we want to hit this route on line 8, right?
Yeah.
So let's go to that artist controller and show. Yeah. So where we have our show action, can you put a pry in there, that first line? And let's see if we're hitting that. Yeah, we did not hit that show. So I don't think we ran that show action. So that's not.
Is it because this should the delete action the delete should take me to the show action instead of destroy?
Well, I don't think we've gotten that far yet. I don't think we've hit that route. Yeah.
But I think the destroy one's fine, like on that. Like the story should be on like the delete. So that one, I think that one's fine.
Yeah, that looks fine. Can you go back to that test? Oh, I think I know what's going on. Can you put a pry right here before the save and open page? Yep. And then can you copy this string into your pry output and see what that generates for us?
Yeah, it's taking the artist index.
Yeah, so what do you all have any ideas of why that this line of code is producing just /artists?
No.
No.
Let's take a look at prints. And now let's do prints.id.
Oh, it's nil.
Yeah.
That's weird. But you know what is more, now I'm even more confused because if I do this, ID2, because of the price, not gonna, 1 second. Why is it not loading? Do I have pry anywhere else?
Yeah, we put one in the controller, I think. Yeah. So you need to find your terminal where you're running this Rails server.
Huh, weird. It was here. It's not there anymore.
Did you just close it out? Is that what happened?
No.
Yeah, it's running somewhere. You have a server running somewhere. Can you do, yeah.
I only have this one open and I don't think that this is running at a server. No. And my terminal is closed. So, and this keeps happening. So I took note of this error when it happens. I keep having to do this. Not sure why.
Yeah, so that'll work, but I would recommend, it seems like you're having a little bit of trouble keeping track of your terminals that are open. So that's, I think the first thing I would recommend is to not use the integrated terminal here just for this reason, because a lot of times they get like lost. But
So, you know what is weird? Like I used the ID 2 and it brought back prints. So there's something wrong with my database, right?
so not quite. What this is pointing to, the fact that this show page seems to be working, the issue is in our test. So your test, you're not visiting the show page. Can you go back to that test? So the reason why this isn't working is because, as we saw, Prince's ID is nil. So we need to save this to our test database before we're going to get this ID. So why aren't these objects saving to the database?
Oh my God.
Oh, because they were new.
There you go.
Mm.
There you go. I think that should get you back on track.
Okay. And then the second thing that happened was with the edit test. So it's saying that it's the same thing. Well, let's see, maybe it's the same exact situation that I used new instead of create. No, this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes.
Oh, I was gonna say, no, I know we did create for that one, but we are getting a similar error where it's telling us like it can't find the link to edit artists.
Yeah, let me check this lesson. Quick link edit. Yeah, I don't love. Can you go to the view for this, the artist index?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we put I think we put it in show. It should be in index.
Go back to the test.
Yeah.
Let's check there. Because I'm just going off of what the test is saying. Yeah, according to the test, this should be on the artist index page.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Index. Artist index page. So I should move so if I move the code from the show page to here, it should work.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and the thing that's kind of confusing about this story is that it has you go to the artist index and then click a link to edit, which makes me think if it's on the index page, the index shows all the artists. So if we click this edit button, how do we know which artist we're editing? So I'm assuming there's like an edit button next to each artist on the index.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think you would have to put this edit inside your each to make one for each artist.
I have to put it. Oh.
There you
Okay, I see what you're saying. I didn't know what artist was at that point.
Yeah, so we're not going to be able to interpret. The error you're getting is for @artist.id. We can't interpolate @artist because we don't have @artist, but we do have this singular artist right here. Yeah, you got it.
That makes sense.
Cool. I'm going to jump back into the main section and I'm going to close out our breakout rooms.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Brought me back right as I was hitting enter to run the final test. So I didn't get to.
Your partner must be so insulted.
You're like, oh, sorry, dude, peace. Okay, Joe, it passed.
All right, welcome back, everybody. I want to do I want to hear what questions came up from you all in that section of the lesson. Anything on these forms? Yeah, Gus, go for it.
So we were talking about the like the private method to get the artist params instead of the params. And we were both noting that like we had not done that on our projects, and it worked, and we weren't getting that error. And I think part of like what we were doing basically was having, and we kind of got hung up on this part of the lesson too, where like if you look at the like when you're in pry, where you have like def create and then just binding.pry, it has this like one of the params like key value pairs is the key artist, and then the value is a hash that has name Megan. And so that like if you were to, instead of saying like artist.create params, you could do artist.create and then pass it like name is params name, that works. So I mean, as far as like, I'm trying to think like how to phrase this, like instead of creating like the way that we weren't able to recreate like that particular like params using the lesson plan, because the form tag it's not named in such a way that it collects like a nested hash. It just gets name Megan. And so the like private method is not necessary if you're able to like reach directly into that hash. So what is going on?
Yeah, can you share your screen? I think this is yeah, this is a very good question.
Yeah, Max has it.
Oh, thank you, Max. Okay, so what we're looking at is we're specifically looking at this private method down here, private artist params. And this method is what we would call strong params. So what's going around right here, right here on these like lines 15 and 16, it seems like you all were experimenting with two different versions. So on line 16, that seems like the version that the lesson plan would have you go through, and you'll see what we're doing here is we're doing an artist.create, and inside that create, we're calling this artist params method. So what happens is once it gets to this line 16, it's going to call this artist params method, which is going to do some stuff with the params object, and then it's going to return that back for our artist.create on this line. And then on line 15, rather than calling a method to look at the params, we're just pulling the name out of the params like this. So both of these versions work. And I will say that both of these versions do essentially the same thing. So what strong params are, and let's do this. I didn't have a slide for this, but I'm gonna take over the screen share, and I'm gonna try and make some quick notes for us about strong params. So here we go, doing it live. Okay, so strong params. What do you need to know about strong params? Well, first of all, what do they do? What do they do? Okay, so it requires us to be explicit about what parameters we are accepting. So for example, when we're creating if we were making a song form, you can imagine something like, for a song, we only want to accept title, play count, and what was the other one? Length attributes. And then maybe for a song, we do not want to accept an ID attribute. Okay, so this is an example scenario. We could also imagine a scenario where we're trying to create users, and some of the information we want to accept about a user is their name and their address and their favorite color, whatever. We might want to get some user information, but we don't want to accept an attribute that lets us set permissions for the user. So for instance, we don't want to accept a parameter that says that this user is an admin or something. The reason we don't want to do those things is because if someone is malicious and they figure out how our application works, they might try to send us additional data that we don't want to store in our database. For example, the ID attribute. So if a user was able to override the ID attribute, they might be able to make their song with ID -1, and that might just break our application somehow. Now, we always want to be explicit about what attributes we are accepting, what parameters we are accepting. That's what strong params allows us to do. Okay, so there are two ways we can do this. So two ways we can accomplish this. Okay, so the first way is we can be explicit about which params manually. And the way that this looks is we do something like this. We say params name. Boom. As soon as we do something like this, we are saying we are accepting this specific attribute. Then we could do another thing like params, I don't know, play count, whatever, etc. This version right here does exactly what we had talked about right here. We are being explicit about what parameters we are accepting. The second way that we can do this is with require and permit. So Rails parameters, that params object, we mentioned this earlier, but params is like a hash with superpowers. This is one of the superpowers that it gets. It gets this ability to call these methods called require and permit. What these methods do is these methods specify which parameters we are accepting. And the other thing that it's going to do, which is really nice, is it creates a subhash with those parameters. And the reason we want to do this is because this format, we'll say it plays nicely with active record. So active record requires you when you're creating or you're updating attributes, for the most part, it will require you to pass them as a hash. And you might have seen that if you try to pass things not as a hash, it'll say hash type required or something like that. So these require and permit methods are really nice because they create a subhash, which is already in that format for us, which makes it really easy to pass to active record. Okay, so I've done some talking. Liam, can I get you to, I think that was Liam. Can you share, no, Max, can you share the screen again with the code you all were looking at? Okay, so when I say that there are two different ways to be explicit about what parameters we're accepting, you are doing both of those ways right here. So this is way number one, which is the more explicit version on line 15, where we say params name, this is the parameter that we're expecting. The second way is what you've done with a combination of lines 21 through 23 and line 16, where you create the strong params method. That method uses the permit method inside it to say we're permitting only the name attribute, and then you're calling that method on line 13. So why would you use one version of the other? Well, as we can see right here, when we only need one parameter, it's kind of overkill. Like we're using this whole like strong param syntax, but really it's just more complicated when we only need one attribute. So why would we do it? Well, once we need more attributes, that's the real answer. So let's do, yeah, let's type out what it would look like if we were creating a song. So we would have, let's take out that play count param. And let's make a new strong params method underneath here called song params. So underneath this artist param method, we're going to define another method called song params. There we go. So this is what it would look like if we had a song object. And in there, we would probably do params.permit title length and play count. And then let's create another create method, even though this is, we normally wouldn't have two of the same actions in the same controller, just to kind of show what it would look like. And then let's do version 1 with the strong param. So we'll do song.create, and then inside that create, we'll pass it song params. And this is the version where it creates the subhash for us, and this all plays really nicely together. Cool. Let's comment out that line, and let's do another version where we are explicit about the param. So we'll do song.create, and then we'll pass it a hash. And we'll say, yep, the title is params title. And then same thing with length and play count. There we go. So we can see that once we have 3 parameters, all of a sudden this version where we are manually saying what params we are accepting, this gets really long. It's so long that it's wrapping onto a new line here. So we don't prefer to use this version. We prefer to use this version where we break it out into a helper method that will do this for us. Really important distinction here. Sorry, not distinction, but really important thing for you all to understand that line 22 and line 21 and 30 through 32, they do the same thing. So this is 2 different versions of doing the same thing.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Absolutely.
So when we were talking about the like having a hash, like within the params and having like the way that the lesson has us like set up the form tag, you end up with a key value pair in the params hash that's key name and then value Megan, versus there's that example like on the lesson page where rather than that you have like key artist and then value as a hash that has a name, you know, has name and Megan as a key value pair. So having that like nested hash like seems to me like kind of a nice thing to have like for the controller, because you can access like all of the data that you've collected in that form. So is there a way like to use form tag to create like a nested form structure like that?
Yeah, definitely. And Max, if you're okay with if you could keep screen sharing, I think this is a really great thing for us to look at. And this also is going to emphasize how these forms work under the hood. So the first thing is, let's go back to that controller. And we have this pry in here, which looks great. So let's go ahead and run our tests and see if we can hit that pry. Where did my drawing tools go? Yeah, we're gonna have to undo some of the stuff that we put in there. Yeah, perfect. Awesome. Okay, so we're at our create method. One thing that I want you all to like kind of make habit is when you pry into an action, just check out your params. Always just type in params and see what it's holding on to. A lot of times this will like keep you on track of what data do I have? Do I have the right data, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So in our params, we can see that we have name pointing to Megan, and this is the only parameter that we need to create an artist. So this looks good. Let's now exit out of this pry and we'll change our form a little bit and we'll see how it changes our params. So let's open up that new page, and can we split that? Can we put that on this right pane over here? Perfect. Okay. So inside this this form, I actually want to take a step back. So let's go back to our test. Let's go to our new artist test. And right before we click on our button to create artist, let's put a save and open page. And let's check out what our HTML looks like. It's going to be save underscore open, save and open page. So it's going to be, and this is snake cased. An underscore page too. So this is one big long method call. And we can do this because if we have the launchy gem installed. So let's run our test now and see if that works for us. Awesome, that worked. Let's now double click on this page. And this is something I want you all to start making use of. Double click, do we get an options thing? Yeah, and then go down to inspect. And let's look at this HTML. So let's open up the body tag there. And let's open up that form. Yeah. So this is also emphasizing, could you do a command plus, Max? Could we make it any bigger? Yeah, perfect. Okay, so this is emphasizing something that I said earlier, which is really important. These action view helpers generate HTML for us. So if we want to look at the HTML, we can do something like this. If we're doing a test, we can do a save and open page to open this. Or if we're not doing a test, if we're doing browser driven, we could go visit this page in localhost and then open up our developer tools to see the HTML that's generated. So we can see here that we get the action, which is our path that we're submitting to. So we're submitting to /artists. And we don't see this in our view helper, but we can see it here that the method, the way that it's submitting is with a post request. So this is where we see the verb and path that get generated. And then we also see all of our inputs here. So we see, whoa, it took me back to Zoom, sorry. It really wanted me to see Liam's message in the chat. Well, I'm at here. So this will take our form tag and display the more complicated HTML for us. And I understand. Yeah, Liam, what it's doing is it's taking, once Rails sees this view helper, it generates all of the HTML for you. So this HTML gets generated every time one of our views is rendered. That is part of the rendering of a view, is to take view helpers and create the HTML for you. Yeah, pretty cool. Okay, so what were we doing? Oh yeah, so another thing to point out here is that each of these inputs here has this name attribute, and look, this name is pointing to a value of name. So this is kind of confusing, but this right here, this name attribute is what determines how it appears in our params hash. So let's play around with this a little bit. Max, can you go back to your form in Atom or in your text editor? And rather than name, can we change this to like just gibberish? Just like put in some true, like just smash your keyboard. Perfect. Okay, so let's do the same process again. Let's exit out of, I don't think it will let you do the semicolon, but yeah, let's exit out of pry. And let's rerun this again and see how our HTML changes. Oh, it doesn't even let us fill that out. Yeah. Yeah, so now that this is not called name anymore, if we go back to our new spec, it's not letting us do fill in name anymore. So what we could do is move the save and open page before it. And now run it. Yep, and now let's double check our form and see how our input changed. Yeah, and now we've got our gibberish here is taking place of our name attribute. Cool. So what this is pointing towards is that we can affect what this is called just by that symbol that we pass it to the view helper. So go back to that form. What this is called in your sorry, the form, not the test. What this is called in our params hash, we have complete control over it just based on what we put in here. Okay, so I've gone over a lot, but Gus, I am getting to your point here. Let's change this to artist and then a square bracket. And then, oh, actually, I don't think this can be a symbol. I think this has to be a string. And then square bracket, name, close square bracket. And no colon on name either, I think. Let's run that and see what that does. Okay, so now this changes the syntax. It let us put those square brackets into our HTML just fine. So now we'll see what's going on in our test is that it can't find that field anymore because we no longer called it name. So what we're going to have to do with this experiment is we're going to have to go into our test and yeah, just copy and paste what we put exactly in our form, just like that. And let's run it again. So Max, run it again, and let's go back to that pry. So what we've been doing up to this point is we've just been trying to get past this fill in. It let us do the fill in. Thank you, Max. So it let us do the fill in, and it looks like it let us click on the button as well. So now we're in our pry. So now that we've been able to submit the form, let's see how all of that affected our params. Yep. And now we can see that with that syntax, now we are nested under a artist key. Could you do some command plus there, Max, just so you can make that a little bigger? Is that working? Yeah, it made everything bigger, but that's good. And I think this is more similar to what Task Manager had you go through. So that syntax of having the bracket will create that nested structure for you. So now what we would have to do is rather than, let's actually do an exit now and see how this affects our test. Yeah, so it didn't like that. Let's run it again and let's put the, actually let's do this, Max. So this is an example of where our test didn't error out. We didn't get a lot of feedback. So on your create, put a bang after the create. So this is a good use case of the create bang version will throw us any errors if there are errors. So let's see if we get any errors. No errors. Okay, let's go back to our pry, or let's run it again so we can hit our pry. Cool, so we're in our pry down here. Let's copy and paste that artist.create line and see what happens.
Where is that? Sorry.
Line 16. Yeah, just throw that and see what happens. Oh, okay, so it created it, but it created it with a nil name. Okay, so let's look at artist params. Yeah, and we can see that it's representing it as an empty hash. So what you're going to have to do here is this is where the require keyword comes in. Whenever your parameters are nested, we can use require to dig through those nested parameters. So let's type params into the console, into the pry one more time so we can check out the params. In order to first say we need to look at this, in order to tell our params that they are nested under this artist key, what we have to add in front of .permit is .require artist. Yep. Yeah, and then just take out that second dot there. There we go. So now let's run this. We'll probably hit our pry. Let's exit out of that pry. And there we go. Now it's passing. So when your parameters are nested, that is the use case when you're going to need to use require. So permit is saying use this parameter. Require is saying look for this parameter underneath this nested key. Okay, so I went over a lot there. Do we have any questions or any follow-up from that? Yeah, Gus.
Yeah, sorry to take up all the time, but on that, could you just do, instead of like permit name, permit artist, and then that would allow you access to the entire hash that's stored as the value?
I don't think so, but we could give it a try. Yeah, Max, if you just change that to params.require artist. And let's also take out a pry. I think we're good on that. So we saw that the test was passing. So if this works, we should still be passing. Yeah, and that didn't quite work. So Max, if you put the pry back in, let's put the pry up in our create method. You could put it in that params method, but I'd prefer for it to be up there. Cool. Let's check out, let's now see what artist params will return to us when we do it with this version. Yeah, so it doesn't let us, it looks like that just doesn't give us access to any of the params. Yeah, so that it looks like that syntax is not quite going to work us.
Cool, thanks.
Hey, Brian, if we switch permit to require, would it change anything?
I don't know. If you in your terminal, Max, if you do params.require artist, what does that do? Yeah, so that returns to us that subhash, but notice how it says permitted false. So that gets us part of the way there, but we still need to explicitly say permit the name param from that subhash.
Okay, very good. Cool.
Yeah, and Max, what you're doing now
this?
in the terminal is, yeah, that just like I said before, where there's two different versions. There's like the longhand version, and then there's taking advantage of require permit. This is the longhand version. Yep, and that'll work. Cool. I realize we're running up on time here, and I would have liked to take a break, but I think just for time's sake, I'm going to finish off with a couple more slides. And I think what this is pointing to, this class, is that I would highly recommend that. I think it is a very good idea for all of you to work through this passing data lesson on your own time, or continue to work with partners. But I think it's really important that that you all not only are able to do the things in this lesson, but also understand what's going on. So I think this is the kind of lesson that you'll probably have to work through multiple times to really get a feel for how it's for everything that it's doing. I think that with this lesson, this kind of we've talked a lot about crudding things, how that's kind of the first most important thing that we can do in our applications. So I do want to point out that this lesson, everything that we've done up to this point in class is complex, and this is all stuff. This is all the core stuff up till this point. This is all the core things that you really need to know for this mod. So forms, creating things with forms, passing data around, having models that you can build, collections of data and store them in the database. This is kind of finishes our most important section. So that all is to say, make sure that you take the time to review what we've covered up to this point. With that in mind, I'm going to finish up with my couple of slides here, and then I'll let you all go. Yeah, that's what we were just doing here. So the last thing that I want to talk about is this button clicking thing. This is the portion of the lesson that goes over deleting an artist. So the final way that we are going to have users submit data, send us data, is by clicking links or buttons. So this might be the use case I talked about in the beginning of class, where maybe a user wants to delete a post on, delete a tweet on Twitter, or maybe you want to read a friend's post on Facebook. You would click the link for that page. So just by clicking on things, users are sending us data. What happens underneath the hood is that every time a user clicks on something, a new HTTP request is sent. And I said this earlier, but really everything that a user does sends HTTP requests. So they fill out a form, that creates an HTTP request. They click a button, creates an HTTP request. Click a link, creates an HTTP request. The data that the user is sending when they click on something is less about the body, whereas a form sends data with like key value pairs where that data appears in the params. When it comes to clicking on things, this sends data just through the verb and the path of the HTTP request. So I'll say that one more time. The data that is being sent when a user clicks on something is just in the verb and the path. That verb and the path is specified on that HTML button or link or whatever it is. So just like with our forms, we are going to have view helpers to generate these for us. And so button 2 is our view helper for that. Link to is another view helper that will create links that we've seen before. Underneath the hood, yeah, I don't have this here, so let's just type this out together. Under the hood, button 2 is actually going to be implemented. I thought I put this in somewhere. Yeah, I thought I put this in, but I must not have saved it, so I'll just take that out here. Under the hood, button 2 generates an HTML. Oh, so I put it there that it's generated as an HTML form. Actually, let's just say this. So it's implemented as an HTML form, and that form has no inputs. So unlike before, when Max was driving and he was showing us his screen and he had an HTML form and that form had inputs inside it, it's going to, this is going to generate an empty form and it's going to have no inputs. And I'll specifically say for the user. So it might have some inputs that are controls for Rails to know about, but it's not going to have any inputs for the user to know about. So this is really emphasizing that point that I made earlier, that all of our view helpers are going to generate HTML for us. For sending data, I said the verb and the path is how the user is sending data. Typically will adhere to RESTful conventions. So we've talked a little bit about REST, and Tim is going to talk about this some more tomorrow. But when we talk about like the user sending us data, typically that data is going to be in a RESTful format. So for example, if a user is trying to delete something, the verb is going to be a delete verb. And then as another example, just we have two, if a user is trying to view something, so for example, you're clicking on a link to view this specific Facebook post, the verb is going to be, can I get a volunteer? What's our verb going to be in this case? Shout it out if you think you know.
Get.
Get, exactly, yep. So get is our HTTP verb that indicates we're trying to view something. And then the last thing, I'll skip over these practice sections and I'll go into query strings. This is something that we're not going to use a ton of in this mod. And it is you'll probably get to it mostly if you're doing some of our extensions, but I do want to talk about query strings briefly. So this is kind of in addition to users inputting something through a URL. Tim went over this last Monday in how the web works, but in the way that we know that a query string is starting is with a question mark. So the query string denotes that we are that the query string denotes, the question mark denotes that we have a query string. These query strings are going to be a collection of key value pairs separated by an equal sign. And you can have multiple key value pairs separated by an ampersand. And just like with our other inputs, these are going to appear as key value pairs in our params hash. So we've discussed several different ways to pass data. All of those ways are going to gather in our params hash. So for example, if we have a request that looks like this, where we have a question mark in it, we can see that there's two key value pairs in here separated by the ampersand. One of them is in our params hash. This will appear as the key of sort and the value of DESC. And the other one is the key of view and the value of dark mode. So typically these params, these query strings, are most useful for getting additional information about a page. So in this example here, this is additional information, seems to be some sort of like the way that we want to view the page. So we want it to be sorted and we want it to be viewed in dark mode. A very common example for this is pagination. So imagine, you go to Amazon.com and you're searching for something. It's not just going to show you all of those results. It's going to show you those results in pages. So maybe it has 10 results per page. Which page you're on is a good example of something you might show in the queried params. I think the key word here is additional information. If there's core information, for example, the ID of what song you're trying to show, that is something that we're going to use a different strategy for, like a dynamic segment. So query params are additional, or maybe another word is supplemental information. The final thing here is that this is not going to affect your matching in the routes file. So even though the query param is part of the path, it does not affect the matching. So a GET request to /shelters and then a query string afterwards will match the same routes as a GET request to just /shelters. The query string does not affect the matching in the router. Eli.
So just in regards to the query params, so like would a good use case be if you were just gonna like sort, like for instance, say the content on the page alphabetically, like you could send that like a parameter through that, and then basically like a condition, if those parameters come through, then just use a different I guess just like display a different view.
Yeah, you're on the right track there. That example might be a different value for our sort. So we might have 4 different, but we might have like a drop down that says like what way where we can select what we're trying to sort, and depending on what way the user selects, we would send different values for this sort param. Yeah, that's a good example.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Oh yeah, and then the last difference here, the only way that if we had this query string, the only way this would affect anything is it would affect our params. So we would see these 2 key value pairs in params, but we would not see any other difference. Max.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, talking about like SQL injection, I recognize you can't inject that really through this, but could you overwrite, say, name equals, and then put in a string or something?
Yeah, that's an example of where you might maliciously try to add extra query. A hacker might manually type in this query param to try and override something. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yes. And I was just wondering what the order is. So if instead of, let's say you did have sort and you were passing through a different sort in your controller, and once it got all the way to the root, which would it look at first?
If you pass in a different, so you're saying like there's maybe two different places where a parameter of sort could come through?
Yes.
Yeah, so a good example would be like, you have a form that accepts like a name parameter, but then you also include a query parameter where it has the name. I don't know which one it would accept. I think but it will only take one of them. So I'd say that's an example of something you want to avoid, is having two different parameters that are named the same thing for that exact reason. One of them will overwrite the other one. I do want to, what I'm going to do is I'm going to push up a completed version of this. I thought I had setlist open. Yeah, I do. So I don't have a passing data branch yet, but I'm going to push that up because a lot of this lesson did have you, it did say like use TDD to see if you can get that far. And I do want to push up a version just so you have an answer key of, so you can check yourself. You can check your work as you work through it. I'm going to drop a survey for you all to fill out as well. And then I think that will do it for this morning. In the afternoon at 1, I am going to be leading your PD session. So we'll be back in the same Zoom room. And then after that, we're going to do a career journal share also in the same Zoom room. So thank you all very much. And I will see you at 1.
Thanks, Brian.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Brian.
You're welcome.